Hello and welcome. This is Mary Magnuson, and on behalf of the Blandin Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar about Minnesota Office of Broadband Development's Border-to-Border Infrastructure Grant Program. This is one in a series of monthly webinars we're offering for our Blandin broadband communities and open to anyone with an interest in using technology to improve community. In a moment, I'll be handing over the reins to Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, who will provide some introductory remarks and introduce today's presenter, Danna MacKenzie, Executive Director of the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development. But before Bill introduces Danna, I'll go over some process points for today's webinar. Right now, all participants are muted, and we expect that you will have a lot of really good questions today, and we're going to try to make it so that you can ask some questions verbally. However, you may simply, if you'd like, type your question into this chat box down here in the lower left corner. If you have your audio enabled on your end, we still can't hear you, but we might be able to turn your audio on in some instances. So if you would like to ask a more complex question, or you could raise your hand by if you have this little smiley face here in the lower right-hand corner of your attendee list box. You can click on it and click on raise hand, and I might be able to turn your audio on so you can ask a question verbally. That's something we can try that's something we can try, and we hope it works. We just haven't done it before, and you would have to have your audio enabled on your end. So then when it would be your turn to ask a question, I'll try to unmute you, or else we'll just have to use this little chat box in the lower right, or lower left, I should say. Well, now let's get started. I'm sure many of you on the webinar today know Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, but for those who don't, Bill has been the Blandin Foundation's primary broadband program consultant for a number of years. Bill?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the webinar. I think this is our record-setting attendance for a webinar, which is great. Happy to have everyone on board. It's my pleasure to introduce Danna MacKenzie. She's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development at the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Danna and I have been working together on internet and broadband issues for more than a decade together, probably twice that, I think, now in retrospect. Danna was formerly the IT director at Cook County, where she helped lead community initiatives on getting dial-up internet, community technology centers, forming a broadband cooperative, and most recently leading efforts to obtain funds for a fiber-to-the-home network from throughout Cook County in partnership with Arrowhead Electric, actually led by Arrowhead Electric Association there. Danna's been on the job for about 6-7 months now at DEED as the director of the Office of Broadband. And it's been great to see her plow ahead on many initiatives, most popularly this $20 million broadband fund that is now going to be in place. So congratulations to her on the position and the great work so far. Danna?
Great, thank you, Bill. Very glad to be here, and fun to see so many familiar names in the list. Bill and Mary are old hats at the webinar format. This is new to me, so bear with us as both I learn the format and we try some new things, because something a little bit different for Blandin is really the intent of this discussion this morning is a discussion. We are going to go through a pretty organized review of the work that we've done so far to develop the application materials for the new grant program. We're going to step through that information, and my intent is that we will try and pause at the end of most slides, and I'll ask for questions and feedback. And for those of you who may be either subscribed to one of the news lists, you may be aware that we are starting an in-person road tour around the state to do a very similar process. And because of the timing of this webinar, it really serves as our kickoff event for that. So we'll take what we learn here today and incorporate that into our learning as far as going forward. But I know some of you may want to, particularly since we're not sure how much of a two-way conversation we're going to have with this tool, some may want to also try and make one of our in-person meetings. So at the end of this slide deck, I do have the information as we currently know it as far as that schedule of times, dates, and locations of where we'll be in your neighborhood. And I would say, Bill and Mary, watch for hands up because I may get going, and if somebody raises a hand, I may miss it. So just interrupt me and flag me if I don't notice it right away.
That was the plan.
All right, great. Let's see. Really, I put this slide in there because my assumption is most of the folks on this call know this information, but there may be some who don't. Just the background of the office, just very briefly. Normally, I do 20 minutes on this. I'm going to take 1 minute on it just to let everyone know that the Office of Broadband Development was created in the 2013 legislation. I came on board in January of this year, and our primary charge is around, obviously, all facets of broadband development, both infrastructure and adoption and use within the state, and specifically to help the state achieve its statutory goals, which include reaching all homes and businesses in the state with 10 megabits down, 5 megabits up minimum connectivity speeds. And the goal is state by 2015, but those of us here on this call today know that we will likely not meet that goal. But with this program and other activities we've got underway, we're starting to make progress in that direction. So we're kind of excited, and I should say the offices consists of myself and Diane Wells, who I know many of you have worked with over the years and is extremely knowledgeable in this area. She's on the call as well, and if there are questions that she's more suited to answer, we may try and get her in on the conversation if the platform allows. If not, we'll follow up with on individual questions that we're not able to answer today later. And just again back to the office. In addition to those broad stroke big goals, there are many specific charges underneath that umbrella. Things like examining rights of way use, including dig once policies, fostering those public-private partnerships to encourage the expansion of infrastructure development, looking at our digital literacy gaps in the state and adoption rates, and then also taking a look at and monitoring federal programs and being proactive in making sure that Minnesota is well positioned to take advantage of those federal programs as they become available. And just the other thing this slide does is this is language from the actual statute, which means it's from our legislators, which to me demonstrates that they're starting to understand this important infrastructure, both the infrastructure piece and the skills and use piece. That it's not a foregone conclusion that it's available, but yet it touches just about everything we do as public institutions, private businesses, and society in general. So I like to refer back to that original language that those legislators came up with. And kind of, I'm getting into the area of the presentation where I need to bracket everything I say or we say with big red letter draft, because again, this is as we get into the specifics of the grant program. Note that this is not all locked into place. The process that we're going through in the next 6 weeks is all about getting feedback from potential stakeholders and incorporating that feedback into our thinking and our planning process. But this slide is just a little bit about the purpose of the grant and a few comments about what the grant is and what it's not. The legislative focus of this grant is to provide state resources that help make the financial case for new and existing providers to invest in building infrastructure into the least served areas of the state. And infrastructure is its sole focus. Preliminary planning, digital literacy efforts, and adoption elements are areas that we know are important, but they are not addressed in the funding provided for under this program. I just want to be clear about that. We know it's not a perfect fit for every initiative or unmet need that's out there in the state today, but this is a start, and we're excited. We think this is a very good start. And our office will be focused on getting these dollars out to the projects that meet the legislative criteria and are the most ready to go over the next 6 months. But our second and arguably bigger desire is to learn from this one-time program what we need to be focusing on for the next round of planning and programs. Because for those of you who are not involved in the legislative process and the state level dialogue, we had our first legislative planning meeting yesterday at DEED, and our budget proposals are actually due in rough draft form July 24th for the next session. So we haven't even caught our breath yet from the results of the 2014, and we're already gearing up, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time on preparing for the 2015 session. But back to that idea that for me, one of the things, the biggest outcomes of this is actually going to be learning what the real need is and where we need to look at modifying state policy to meet those needs. So in that regard, we are encouraging everyone who's probably sitting here and believes there's some unmet need within their community to make an effort to apply for this program. And we know very well there's a much larger need out there than we're going to be able to fund with this round, but we will be able to learn a lot and make help on what needs to come next by the applications that come in that front door. So that's something that we're hoping we can help happen to anyone who's even thinking about this. So the second piece on this slide is just a very brief recap of allowable costs. And I'm not going to take a deep dive on this, but I just wanted to be clear again that the grant is about funding those infrastructure costs that are associated with building and acquiring middle mile and last mile infrastructure. And then just briefly, grant costs are reimbursable. Anything that's incurred after July 1 or this fiscal year can qualify for reimbursement. Diving into some really nitty-gritty details, because the assumption is that's what people really care about, and we know that, and I'll get to that in a minute, but that you need this information as soon as possible, even though we won't be actually releasing the application for a little bit longer here. Kind of getting into some of the big block items. Most of you are aware that this was a $20 million one-time legislative appropriation, and just for your information, up to 3% of that amount is available for the admin costs, as well as the mapping program that did not receive individual funding as was originally pursued in legislation, but instead they made the choice to have that be included into the 3% of this amount. So we'll have a little bit north of $19 million to award during this round. And the funds will be distributed in a single competitive grant round. And the reason for that is again, as I mentioned earlier, we want to get this money out as quickly as possible. We want to get it out before the next construction season, and we need to start learning from this first round about what needs to come next. And again, if you've read the legislation, you'll know that any technology that's proposed and would be considered as an eligible applicant must prove that it's scalable to at least 100 megabits up and down, and we can get into the details of that later if anyone has questions. But that, again, is a legislative specification, as is a cap of $5 million per grant award. Again, the intent, we don't have a huge pot of money given the gaps that we know is out there, and so the legislative intent is to award these grants in geographically dispersed areas around the state. And at least 1-to-1 match is required. We have to be careful how we say that. I had one question earlier this week, was that 50 cents match for every dollar of grant, and no, it is we are not able to fund any more than 50% of eligible expenses of a proposed project. And so and you'll see there that I've noted that part of the intent here is to leverage outside investments. That's what the state wants the legislators want to see. And so, one of the things ways we will be accomplishing that is through awarding additional points for a higher match amount. So that's something else that if people have questions on, we can get to that in a moment. And I talked about the fact that the desire for geographical variety in the awards, and another very technical detail, but one that's going to be very important for any proposers, is that all invoiceable work must be completed by the end of December of 2016, and that allows for 2 construction seasons for this grant if needed. And it also allows for all of the back-end work to be completed by the legislative deadline, which is June 30 of 2017, or the end of that fiscal year. And just one other piece that I didn't mention here to the match, because I get this question as well. There's some ambiguity in the legislative language about match. There is a reference to in-kind match. The intent is to leverage as much cash match as possible. So while in-kind match are allowable and will be fully considered, there will likely be a premium awarded to those applications that include a cash match. So
Danna,
that's kind of, yes.
There's a question from Chris Stover. Will there be a local government match required as well, or is it the match can come from multiple sources?
You bet. And I'm going to just make a comment. I'm going to try and ignore the questions until I get to the bottom of a slide, because otherwise I lose my place. So I will try and look at the end of the slide, and there is not a local government match required, but local government match are very welcome. And for those of you who follow the legislative process, that was certainly the intent of some of the legislators involved in crafting this legislation, is that there be ways created that local governments can participate and partner in this process. Let's see, and as I think the question about will the slide deck be available, Blandin's going to make the recording available. Let's see, Jan, if the FCC offers funding through their broadband experiments, can those funds be used for the Minnesota broadband match? Yes, we are agnostic. The grant is agnostic to the source of matching funds, with the possible exception of other state funds. We're getting clarification on whether or not you can match a state grant program with other state funds. That's an open question to be answered right now. We are unclear about whether or not the FCC timeline is going to align well with our timeline. We're going to know more, obviously, after tomorrow, because the FCC is going to have a discussion at their meeting tomorrow, so we should get some good information then. We are very open and want to work together if there are ways that we can leverage the 2 programs. So we'll want to talk to anybody who gets to that point in their process. Any other questions on this slide? Am I moving in the right direction? It's a deep dive into the details, because that's what we are hearing at the office, that people want to get as much detail as we're able to talk about now. So feedback along those lines in the chat box is welcome. So Not seeing any more, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Eligibility, not a lot of new information here for anyone who's read the legislation. This list comes directly from that language, and basically the intent was not to exclude any entity that is well positioned and interested in contributing to the solution, whether that be a private business such as an existing provider, a political subdivision such as a city or a township or a county, a tribal entity, nonprofits, cooperatives, and LLCs are all eligible applicants for this program. And the one thing to keep in mind, given timelines and given the interest in projects that are ready to go to hit the ground running once this funding is awarded, is that if anyone is considering a new entity, that entity should be up and fully formed by the time that the application is made. Let's see. That's a great question. Kyle's asking about how about an out-of-state co-op doing business in Minnesota. That's a good question. It's very specific. Have not thought through that scenario yet. I will capture these questions, Kyle, and we'll circle back with you on that issue and find out if there are any barriers. Because again, our primary desire here is to get service to all parts of Minnesota, and we just need to determine whether or not there are any legal barriers to using state grant funds to an out-of-state co-op, but we'll get that answer for you. Anything else? Jan is asking about joint powers, and my understanding is that is also joint powers have the same legal rights as any one of their individual entities. So my unofficial response is that a joint powers would qualify, but again, we will take that back and circle back with you to get confirmation on that. Okay, the application process and timeline. Again, draft. You'll get sick and not tired of me giving that caveat, but we anticipate that there will things that will crop up that will modify this, and this is the best we have based on the information we have today on what we see happening. But that said, I am pleased that we're on pace to get this announcement and application out by late September, which is quite a bit earlier than we were told would be possible within the framework of standing up a program of this size within DEED in the state. So far we are making good traction on putting all the pieces together we need. So we'll stick with that estimate until we get further information. And the application window will be 30 days. And which is the big takeaway from that is the idea that a potential applicant that waits till the grant is announced is probably not going to have enough time to put all the pieces together that are needed for a grant of this type. And so that's why we're out there now encouraging the groups that are working on this to start assembling the pieces, and we will do our best to get you as much information as you need to work on that from now through into the fall. So then we will be open for 30 days, and then at the end of that 30 days, we will compile all of the applicant names and all of the proposed service areas, and that will begin our 6-week application review process. And in parallel to our application review process, the first 2 weeks of that will be an open challenge window whereby we will accept any challenges that have evidence that applicants may have been inaccurate in claims that the area they are proposing to serve is considered or underserved. And so that window will be the first two weeks of the review process. So during that 6 weeks, obviously, we will assess all applications for meeting the minimum qualifications, and then we will use a tested process that DEED uses for competitive grants as far as a team scoring and evaluation process over those six weeks. And obviously, we'll be applying the grant criteria that we'll get into here in just a moment. But then ultimately, after the 6 weeks is done and all of the grants have been reviewed, the Commissioner of DEED will make the final grant awards, which we are hopeful will happen by late December. So that's kind of the application process and timeline. Do we have any new questions? Bill? You know, Bill, I know you can talk, so I could hear another voice instead of just hearing my voice rattle.
I can talk, and there are no questions right now, but I guess I have one about the challenge process. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Will applications and their geography be posted online, or
yeah,
we just go to incumbent providers for that feedback, or what? How does that work?
Well, that's why we're so that providers are aware that this is going to happen, and we will do a specific reach out to all providers in the state so they are aware of this. But then what we'll do on that close date is we will turn around and publish that list of applicants and their proposed service areas. So one of the things we'll be asking for is those proposed service areas to be described in such a way that it will be easy for us to turn around that list quickly. And that will go on the website and will be open for challenge for 2 weeks. And we expect that any challenge to come with concrete evidence on where they see the discrepancy. We'll then take that, any challenges that we receive, we will work with both the challenger and the applicant and do whatever it takes, whether it's phone calls, meetings, and whatnot, to clarify where the discrepancies are and make a final determination after that.
Okay, and then could you describe the served and unserved criteria again?
Oh, you bet, absolutely. I really didn't spend much time on that, so thank you for reminding me. For the purposes of the grant, the intent of the legislators was to focus this funding on the least served areas of the state. And they did that by prioritizing areas that qualify as unserved. And they define unserved as any area of the state that doesn't meet the FCC's current standards for broadband, which is 4 megabits down and 1 megabit up. And I'll get into some maps that we have in a minute here that will clearly show those areas in your counties, in your areas. And then, however, they also allowed for consideration of underserved. And underserved, by definition for the grant purposes, is any area of the state that may meet FCC standards but do not meet state standards. And state statute standards are 10 megabits down and 5 megabits up, minimum connectivity. And so we are able to consider both types of areas in this application process. Does that get at what you need, Phil?
Yes, thanks. And then Jan Keel has a question
about
documentation.
I will get into that. I'll try and answer your question in a few slides, Jan, and then re-ask it. Or if I don't get everything that you're asking, we'll take another stab at it. But I will talk about that issue in just a moment. Not seeing any other questions, I'm going to keep going. Now we get into application requirements. These are the elements that we will be asking for on the application. Obviously, the description of the area to propose to be served. We anticipate that this will be done through maps and through census blocks and road boundaries are what we anticipate seeing is in the way of descriptions of areas to be served. We will also ask the applicant to indicate whether or not this is for last mile or middle mile or both, and this is a good time just to remind people that both types of construction are allowable in this grant program. The kind and the amount of broadband infrastructure to be purchased, I believe, is the exact language that was in the legislation, and this is really the section of the application where we will be asking for project details, project design, and technical plans will fall under this area, and as well as this area will be where we will ask for the demonstration that any technology is scalable to at least 100 megs up and down. Let's see, and then obviously we'll need that evidence regarding the unserved and underserved nature of the community, and our starting point for that is going to be those Connect Minnesota maps, which is also the federal data, because Connect Minnesota is collecting that data on behalf of the FCC, the federal government, through the SBI, or State Broadband Initiative, I may have that last word wrong, program, and so the data that they collect is fed up to the FCC and the National Broadband Maps, and that's the best data we have, so that will be the data that will be used as a proxy for determining un- and underserved. That said, I'll get into a couple of caveats to that statement in a minute, but that will be one of your primary tools for indicating underserved and unserved. And then obviously we'll need numbers of households passed under both types of classification, unserved and underserved. Community institutions is another one that was called out specifically in the legislation, and so we will want to see a list of any community anchor institutions that will benefit from the proposed project. And just as a way to segue into the next one, that same list of community institutions is a great list to draw from for expressions of community support for the project. And we will be looking at all types of expressions of support, whether it be letters, petitions, YouTube videos for just any way that your community feels is appropriate for demonstrating community support of the project. And again, legislators' intent there is to encourage communication between whoever the proposed provider for the service is and the community itself, and wants to see evidence of that support. And then obviously we care about the total cost of the project, which includes both eligible expenses and ineligible expenses. We expect most projects may have a combination of both types of expenses. And then finally, just the source of all of those funding sources. Again, that is primarily, we are agnostic to as far as the law is concerned. I mean, we're agnostic as long as the source is legally allowable by the state of Minnesota's other grants policies. And so we are dealing with any detailed questions around that on a one-off basis. So if anyone's got unique questions around that, we will definitely field those. So that's a quick run through. I see we got a little bit in the chat box and maybe something scrolled up, and I'm not able to scroll back.
There's nothing, yeah, there's nothing in the chat box right now, I mean, that you need to...
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Just, yeah.
Housekeeping. I see that.
Right.
Here we go. Bill's got one for me. Can you talk about the importance of anchor institutions, since most of these are already in served communities? It is not a requirement that anchor institutions are served by these projects. It is, you will, an application will get extra consideration based on the legislative language for anywhere where they are able to serve anchor institutions. Again, the intent is that if a build is happening and it's going by a a fire hall or a little town library that is not well served, or a clinic that's not well served, that they be considered in your project design. That's really the intent of that emphasis. And anywhere we can measure where a school district or a library or a clinic or a hospital gets benefit from this program, that's a good thing for all of us, obviously. Good question. Thank you. I'm going to turn my page slow because I see somebody typing a question.
Sometimes that doesn't mean anything if somebody, I don't think it takes much to show that somebody's typing.
All right. Well, then I'm not going to delay, but I'll circle back to it if need be. Because now I'm going to get into the scoring criteria, and we've actually got about 3 slides on this. So I'll try and go a little bit quick, but I think this is the area that anybody who's thinking about applying cares about most. So we'll just plow ahead, and you guys give me feedback if this is and I see Kevin's got our ineligible parts. Oh, I got 2 now. Are ineligible parts of the total project eligible for the match part? No. Match must be made on eligible project costs. And Kevin, let me know if that doesn't answer your question, but I think you're asking if, for instance, would an investment made in a digital literacy program, which they say in the legislation, would that count towards match? And no, it does not count as match, but dollars paid for fiber obviously does qualify. And Pat, it's possible that there will not be a huge number of community institutions in un- or underserved areas. How will this be handled in the review of applications? For example, will township halls be included in this as an institution? I think this may have been covered in your response to Bill's prior question. I think I covered that. Again, covering community anchor institutions is not a requirement, and there won't be huge bonus points assigned. The idea is they want project designers to look around and see, are there any as yet unserved community anchor institutions not met that may be nearby that we could incorporate it in our design. And I have to be careful because I think up in our northeast region of the state, our community anchor institutions are very well served or will be soon, and that doesn't necessarily hold true for all parts of the state. So that's another thing to keep in mind with that particular element. Getting into the meat of this slide, so most of these, if not all, were listed in the legislation in one form or another. Again, I think I touched on already, the intent of that legislation was to give priority consideration to those least served areas of the state as defined by the FCC. So there will be points, premium points awarded for areas that have a higher concentration or a higher number of unserved households that are met. However, the language does also allow us for underserved areas. So those folks, while they won't necessarily receive bonus points for the underserved areas, we are fortunate to be able to include those in our consideration for eligible funding. And if the way I phrased that isn't clear, let me know. But essentially, if we were going to award 100 points for all of the criteria, there would be an additional 10 points that would be awarded, and we would look at all of the grant applications that are received and rank them for the amount of unserved included in their application, and those 10 points would be awarded on a spectrum based on that one element. So I hope that makes it clearer, but I can tease that out further if we need to. And we will consider that data in both number of households and percentage of project, because we know obviously some of these are going to be very tiny with very few numbers, And so we'll be looking at both aspects of that element. Economic distress, that's kind of a unique one. We don't have a lot of areas that qualify for this at the federal level, but it's one of the things that the legislators wanted us to consider. If there are areas that are particularly fall under the economic distress criteria, either through unemployment stats, poverty designations, or population loss as compared to the statewide average, the legislation asks for some consideration and points awarded to those types of areas. And then, let's see, the next one is economic development potential. Those of us here today all understand the economic development potential of these projects, particularly in the rural parts of the state. And it's natural with where our program is housed that this be an element we look at. So we will be asking for any information that a project might have about what the economic impacts of the region may be from the proposed project. And then sustainability of the project, we'll be looking at both the project plans, the financial plans, and at indicators of the project sustainability, and applications will be scored on demonstrated sustainability of the proposal. And I'll get more into that in the next slide, but I'm going to take a peek. We've got Bill's got a question here. How would you view an application to serve an underserved industrial park in a generally served community? It's going to, again, all of the there is nothing in the language that would preclude that type of application. So we would absolutely take it in, and assuming it meets all the other criteria. However, because of things like households unserved and some of the other criteria we're being asked to rank these proposals on per legislation, I don't know. It's not clear to me how well an application that was just for an industrial park would fare in the process. And I hope that kind of gets at what you're looking for. Good question. I'm going to go on to the next one. A couple of other, so we talked about financial. We will also be looking at things like org charts, company history, or organizational history, and management resumes as other indicators of project viability and sustainability when evaluating the application. So there will be some scoring. Again, that will factor into that sustainability score for the evaluation process. And as mentioned earlier, evidence of community support will also be an element of the scoring criteria. And I think I also mentioned the project plan and timeline is particularly important, because one of the things that the governor and the legislature has a priority is getting these funds out there and working and demonstrating positive results as quickly as possible. So the applications will be scored on, I hate to use the overused term for all of us who went through the ARA program, but shovel ready. We will be looking for elements that indicate that the project is ready to go and will be able to hit the ground running for this round. We will also take a look at price and speed packages and make sure that what the offerings of any proposal are not way out of line with what's happening elsewhere in the state and on a national level. We do not have the criteria of that assessment dialed into the nth degree, but know that we will be taking a look at that and ranking the projects on that indicator as well. And finally, let's see. We already talked about the community anchor institution, so we'll be asking about I think we talked about it earlier as far as what we'll be asking for in the application, but just wanted to be explicit that there will be some points given if a project is able to incorporate one of those entities. How are we doing? I think we only have one more scoring criteria slide, and let's see where
and you do have 2 questions in the chat box too.
Yep, I'm just kind of doing a time check, and let's see. If we have an area of 12 unserved residential that do not scale to 100/100, but through this grant could receive 50 meg down and 3 meg up. No reason to submit a project for these folks because it does not scale to 100/100. Again, I just want to clarify that the legislation does not require that the service the initial service be at 100/100. It does require that proof be given that any technology that's purchased with state dollars is capable of scaling to at least 100/100. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds with you, Mark, and I would be glad to talk with you more about the details of what you're thinking there. But I hope that sort of gives you a general idea of what the intent of the legislation is and what we would be looking for in an application. Chris, no, there is not an application available. That's what this process is about, is to walk through and get feedback on finalizing the application materials. And so this is the format we will be giving the preliminary information to give communities what they need to know to work on it over the summer, and the application will be released in that September timeframe. Let's see. Oh, we got one more. Will the weighting of the various evaluation criteria be published? We are still. That is unclear at this point. There will be some general indicators on the grant application, but it will not get down to the finest detail. But applicants will understand at least the big block areas of how the weighting will be determined. And we don't have that information for you today, but we're at least able to give you the points that will, through the discussion here, I'm trying to give you a sense of the areas that are being considered priority, and basically we're taking our direction from the legislation. I'm going to go on to the next. The elements on this slide are just a little bit different in that these elements are not necessarily directly associated with fundable expenses, but they are items that the legislators included in the legislation to indicate these are important elements that they want us to look at as well in those applications. And so we will take a look at evidence of any health and public safety benefits. And with the health benefits, it may even be explicitly in the legislation. It was in one version of telemedicine. They are interested in seeing telemedicine enabled more broadly across the state. And interestingly, recent trip out to DC and talking with the Veterans Affairs and Health and Human Services, is they are very interested in seeing this happen too, and they are eager to work with us in any way they can, because as some of you may be aware, they are actively trying to deliver more services out, particularly into the rural areas, using telehealth and telemedicine techniques. And so this is an area that we will be looking at in the applications. Another one that was mentioned in the legislation was evidence of technical support and training on broadband, the idea of the digital literacy component. Our project plans incorporating that part of the need into their thinking, and they'd like to see evidence of that in an application. So we'll be taking a look at that in the evaluation process. And then finally, just the marketing plan. This gets back to that sustainability piece, and while they did specifically call this out in legislation, it's just good to note that we'll be looking for any marketing plans or promotions that are part of the project. And again, I say these are different because while we'll be looking for those in project plans, those are not specifically fundable expenses of this funding, but are still an important outcomes of the projects. And then just again, the economic development benefits will be looked at in our application review. So that's kind of the end of the scoring, a very quick rundown of the elements in the scoring criteria. And I'm going to just kind of take a pause here and ask, I see a couple of questions in. Let's see, we've got from Cheryl, did I hear you say that these are not eligible use of grant funds or match and are just additional application? Correct, that is correct. The grant funds are to fund the acquisition and construction of the infrastructure required to deliver last mile and middle mile infrastructure, and that is the allowable expenses. And I don't know if another helpful piece of information that I don't know that I mentioned earlier, but again, for folks who are lining up their financing, another important piece is the way this is done is invoices for eligible expenses should, once an award is made and expenses are beginning to be incurred, the way that the financial piece works is that eligible invoices are submitted to DEED, and DEED will reimburse 50% of eligible invoices. So that's how the process works. And the reason I mention that is because I had a conversation with one project that was talking about some types of financing and considering delaying when they access that financing till later in the project to save them some costs. But you need to know that you need to have some of that accessible right up front because of the way that this is the way the reimbursement process works. Pat, for many of you, you may be aware that DEED is doing regional meetings across the state, and I will get to that in just a moment. Our in-person meetings for this process, we're going to do pretty much what we're doing here today, only it will be in person and a live dialogue. We are piggybacking with that tour that's going around the state and starting July 18th. And one of my last slides is the calendar for those events as we know them right now. So I will, we can talk about that when we get to that slide. So that's kind of in a nutshell the high-level overview of our plans and our process. I'd kind of like to just spend a couple more minutes on, and I got to go quick because we got 5 minutes left, on what potential applicants should be working on now to be prepared for when the application is released.
Danna, I just want to tell you if we go long, that's fine too.
Okay, yep, but I know everybody else has got schedules too, so I'll try and talk fast, but given I do have a couple slides left, and so we will go long, and I apologize. Anybody can call and ask us questions that we don't get to that you need answered to kind of keep moving on your process. So what can you be doing now? First of all, take a look at your area, the areas in your vicinity that are eligible for the grant as defined in the criteria. And our best tool for that right now is the Connect Minnesota data. And the data that data was again gathered by Connect Minnesota for the federal national broadband map, and is also used to create the custom maps here in Minnesota. One of the things we did was we asked Connect Minnesota to create custom maps for this grant opportunity. So, and I'll get there in just a moment. But now is the time to start looking at those maps and addressing those concerns that I think someone brought up earlier, and I'll talk about in just a moment. So now's the time to do that. Connect Minnesota has agreed to work with any community that contacts them about those issues to correct the maps down to the address level. So the next thing is establishing partners. Successful applications typically have some level of partnership here, and we know these partners take a while to get into place. So make sure the right people are at the table now to be able to bring the elements of this of the application materials together in the time frame needed. Also, if not already done, the project designs, generating project schedules and budgets, we all know take time. So those are things that hopefully are in process or should be soon, if not already. And then financial match. Some types of financial commitments take longer than others. They take getting in front of boards and resolutions and or financial institutions, and that's not something that will likely be able to be done in that 30-day application window. So those are things that you want to think through the mechanics of now and get the ball rolling if it looks like a go that you're going to be able to apply for this opportunity. And again, the gathering of community support. That can be done at any time, and for those of us who've run teams before, there are often team members who may not be in a position to do some of the more technical aspects of the project, but this is a great job for them, is to go out and make those connections and gather those expressions of community support. Let's see, we've got a question. You mentioned that DEED will be reaching out to all providers in the state. Is that happening now? Yes. We have been doing it on an individual basis right now, but as the elements of this program get in place and we have something concrete for providers to respond to or react to, we will contact them as a group and more formally. But we have had many one-on meetings with providers who are interested in details, and we will do that with any provider that's interested. So just let us know if you would like to sit down and talk one-on-one about this. And that both goes for new entrants as well as existing providers, I should clarify. Bill, can you clarify the 100 meg? Does that have to be symmetrical? Yes, as the legislation dictates that any technology that's going to be purchased with state funds be scalable, again, scalable, to 100 megs both directions. Doesn't mean it has to do it today, but that you're able to show that it can be scalable to that. Kelly, what level of detail are you looking for with the project design? The more detailed, the better. Again, the reason we're doing this for two reasons. We need to do some level of technical evaluation that the proposal is technically viable, that we're not being, asked to serve gigabit connectivity in Vulcan Township through the interconnection of tinfoil hats. So we need to do that level of evaluation, but we also need to use it for are the costs reasonable associated with the proposed design, and does the proposed design indicate that this project is ready to go? So if it's obviously sketched on the back of a napkin, that's going to tell us something about it, versus if you've got engineered design, we will likely be looking for designs that actually have engineer certification, and I'll get into that detail a little bit more probably later in our process, not today, but we are considering and whether or not we would require an engineer sign off on any design work that is submitted and qualifies, just to make sure that the design has been reviewed by a qualified engineer. Oh shoot, it's 10:01, darn it, let me see. Very briefly, getting to the mapping question, we have heard that many communities are aware of areas that are not reflected accurately in the Connect Minnesota maps. one of the primary reasons for that is because we are asking these maps to do something different than they were originally created for. The federal government hired the map makers and the data collectors like Connect Minnesota to gather data at the census block level. And so that is what these maps are based on. We want it to tell us information at the address level. And this is the first time we're really giving the maps that level of scrutiny. Connect Minnesota has generously stepped up and said that any place where a community does identify address level differences than what's reflected in the map, they will work with you to make those adjustments if there's evidence supporting that those changes. And so here is on the Connect Minnesota website under Learn and County Profiles, you'll have a map that's specifically designed to give you an idea of our current view of the areas that qualify for this grant. That should help you have the conversation at the local level. And then the second item on the slide is the link to, should you find places where you'd like to see Connect Minnesota take a look and check for discrepancies, that they have a form set up at that link where you can start the process for having that conversation. Let's see, we've got Kyle. What will the process be to ensure geographical disbursements of the grant? Kyle, that's a question. Congratulations for being the first one to ask me an I don't know question. That DEED has several processes, and it really is going to that they use to make this determination. It's really going to depend first on what we get in the door, and so one of the things we'll do in evaluating the pool is kind of put all of the applications on a map and take a look and see what type of geographical dispersity we have. Dispersity that we have. So I can't tell you specifically the mechanics of how that will be determined at this point. We're just going by the legislative intent, asking for that consideration. Okay, I got 4 minutes over. Let's see. We've got one more from. Any idea how long will take Connect Minnesota to make map changes? I don't. We're just very much encouraging people to do that process now because they shut down in September for changes because of the federal requirements that they need to meet. So we are asking all communities to take a look at those maps now and get that process started now. The Connect Minnesota maps include wireless coverage. However, the grants are targeting wireline. Jan, if you take a look at the maps that I just pointed you to, those maps do not include wireless coverage. That's one of the reasons we asked them to create those custom maps so that that element isn't confusing to you. So let us know if I think what you'll see will get at the question that you're asking. Pavo, is the 100 megs capability required right at the start, or can this be handled with subsequent enhancements such as electronic upgrades? Yes, again, the emphasis is on scalable. And so any project will need to submit evidence that what they've got is scalable to that level. I am not at a place where I can go down to the level of detail on you, as far as your questions right now, as far as what that constitutes. We are going to be looking at the proposer to make the argument that their design is scalable, and so we can get into that more offline, and it's a good question, and when we can address more on a later date. The next round submission is 6:30 to 8:13, with the latter being the deadline. Zach, I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. I'm going to go on. Brian, where can we get these slides? Blandin is going to put this up. I think, Mary, do you usually have it the next day?
Usually it's the next day, but it might be today since we're in the morning.
Okay.
I'm planning on sending a link around to everyone that's registered.
Okay, great. Jan, is there some expectation for the broadband grant funding beyond this one-time opportunity? Great question. I don't know if you heard in the beginning, that's one of the things that we'll be looking for through this process. This is a one-time funding appropriation, so there are no tails to this as currently defined. That said, the discussion by legislators when this was appropriated was let's continue to take a look at this and evaluate the need for ongoing action. And there is discussion both within the deed, the governor's office, and the legislators who forwarded this legislation to look at what might be appropriate for this next session. So anyone who's interested in participating in those conversations is very welcome. Diane, I think Zach is referring to the deadline for providers to submit data to Connect Minnesota. Connect Minnesota then takes that data and will use the bulk of the month of September to format for submitting to NTIA, and it is difficult to have any additional work done for them by them during that time. And, oh, Bill, I did not realize you were on the line. Sorry about that. I would have thrown those questions to you. Bill from Connect Minnesota is on the line, and he is reiterating that they have stepped up and agreed to do whatever they can to accommodate making those changes. Again, just thank you for sitting through this and me keeping you long. I want to reiterate, there's still time to adjust the process, and my next slide is going to be that schedule of meetings, but we're also, to the best of our schedulability, it's getting a little crazy. We are meeting with folks on a one-on-one basis when we can, but Diane and I and Bill are all here to answer your questions. And again, the reason for that is we want you to keep us as busy as possible this fall with lots of applications. And then just briefly, here's the list. So on Friday, July 18th, we'll be in Montevideo. On the 28th, we'll be in Baxter at the Lodge. On the 30th, we'll be at IRRB. And on the 19th in Crookston and the 22nd in Owatonna. The West Central region is still to be determined, and we are also working on a meeting in Chisago County, and that will also be sometime before the end of August. Date is still to be determined. All right, and then my contact information. We will continue. We're trying to get email blasts out about every 2 weeks now. And this will be one of the primary channels we use to distribute new grant information as it's certified ready for the public. So we encourage anybody who's not already on our email blast to go to this website and subscribe to our email list. It's a Gov Delivery list, so those of you who use Gov Delivery know you kind of have to pick Broadband under the list. But we have been using this tool for the last few months, and it's working well for us, we think. Give us feedback if it's not. All right, that's what I got. Sorry, I went 10 minutes long. Anything else?
Well, I guess I'll wrap us up then, and if any other questions come in the next minute, I suppose we can quick address them. But again, everyone, I will send around an email once everything is posted up on our Blandin on Broadband blog. So watch for that email. I have all your email addresses, so we'll get that out hopefully later today. But thank you so much, Dan. You're very welcome, and thank you, Danna, for joining us on the webinar today. It was great. Our next webinar will be Thursday, August 14th from 3 to 4 p.m. I'm excited to tell you all that the Blandin Broadband team will be talking about our 2015-16 iteration of the Blandin Community Broadband Program. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.